1, 2. Weston. All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll get started. So, welcome to the British Offsite Hub. We're here at day 2 of UK Reef. Hopefully, everyone had a really productive day yesterday. We've already had some great panel discussions upstairs in the conference room. So, but today, I think we've got a conversation about something which is on the tip of everyone's tongue. That is the building safety regulator, the application process. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get representation from the regulator today, but we are all committed to having a really balanced conversation. This isn't going to be a whinge-a-thon, frankly. And we have a responsibility as an industry to find the way forward. So that's what we're going to try and drive out of today's conversation. So without further ado, though, we have an excellent panel with some great experience. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, please.
Good morning. Yep. Neil Brearley from Consultancy. One of the founding directors in the business. We're a project management, cost management business specialising in residential development. I've worked in the industry for 25 years and been an advocate of modern methods of construction and different ways of building for the last 10. So that's me.
Hi, Steve Tennant. I'm Managing Director for Development at Ballymore. We are a family-owned business operating mainly in London, high-density buildings, projects. We've built 20,000 homes in London. So far we've got 15,000 homes in the pipeline. And we have got some stories about Gateway 2 that we'll share today. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Peter Gore. I'm the Chief Exec for Weston Group. I've been in the industry for around about 30 years, been at Weston for nearly 4. Obviously, British Offsite is part of the group, so really pleased to be supporting Shaun here today, and hopefully we can talk about how MMC can help this challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm Daniel Leach. I'm the CEO for Design for Structures. We are a civil and structural engineering consultancy, but we work to a manufacturing level of detail. So we've been working with manufacturers for over 25 years. So we actually see Gateway 2 as a really good opportunity for us as a business.
Excellent. All right, we've got at least one positive mindset in the room there. There's some opportunity. So look, I know we were kind of preaching to the converted here, so we won't dwell on it too long. But essentially, on the back of the Grenfell disaster, I think there's essentially been a bit of a loss of trust in the industry, particularly around specifying materials and making sure that buildings are safe, which has led to the regulator. And as a key part of that process, before we start construction activities, we have to go through the second gateway. And right now, there is a significant backlog of approvals going through that process. Now, that's for various reasons. And maybe actually I'll start off picking on Peter. What's the Weston Homes experience there?
I think, like before I sort of go on to, I think it is important to point out that despite all the challenges that we're seeing at the moment, the intentions behind the regulator is sound. No one can say that. Obviously, how it's been implemented has been the challenge, and that's for a whole host of reasons that we could sit here all day. But I think ultimately that the intentions are sound, and you think back to or think about how we've done this for years. We sort of part design buildings, on the hoof, and decide that the right way to start a project is to design as you go. Now, when you think back about that, how can that be practically the right way of doing it? And that investment in time up front has got to be right. But as an industry, we don't like change. We certainly don't like to be forced into change. So that cultural shift is going to be something that we have to embrace. But the long-term benefits of it are going to be there. So from a Western perspective, we've submitted a mixture of gateway submissions, be it for legacy or the Gateway 2 for one of our first projects. And yeah, it has been challenging. I think the biggest challenge for us really has been about getting some level of understanding of where we are in the system and where the regulator is in implementing the multidisciplinary team, because I think ultimately we've all tried to plan our projects around this hypothetical timeline, and actually what we haven't anticipated is that that initial timeline has really been used to really mobilise the team that the regulator is, trying to utilise to help get the assessments underway. So that's been our first challenge, that we've gone into this black hole. Everyone's gone into the black hole, but we've gone into the black hole with no real feedback apart from a regular request for an extension. But we've sort of come to terms with those sort of emails. But that's really been where we are. Once we've got the multidisciplinary team appointed, we have felt a bit more comfortable, albeit the challenges we have are sort of inactivity from that submission through the process, and I suppose inactivity around dialogue with us. Because I think if there was a better dialogue, we would understand the process better, and I think we could plan better. And I suppose if I think about how we could help the regulator, and you've got to understand that they initially thought they were going to talk about new buildings, and then they've had to deal with the historic stuff that's shoved upon them, and then been told to focus on that. So that challenge, has to have been overcome. But I think if you could put some form of pre-app discussions in there, where you could actually give feedback of what's coming down the pipeline, I think, because that's part of the thing for them. They haven't been able to plan. No. But if they could have seen what was coming their way, maybe they could have planned better. And the fact that it's a paid service means they're not going to mobilise. So if we as an industry could give them more transparency and clarity of what's coming, and there is a pre-app service in there, then maybe we could have, they could have scaled up quicker and more effectively. So that's a little bit of what we're dealing with. I understand we need to let other people talk, Shaun.
No, that's quite all right. It's quite all right. Yeah. So a little bit more transparency, and I'm sure everyone's heard the word collaboration extensively at UK Reef. But collaborate a little bit more on, like you say, the pipeline of work. So particularly so we can get multidisciplinary teams appointed in good time. Stephen, if you don't mind, we've spoken a little bit though about maybe some self-reflection in the industry, because there's I think probably fair to say, a spectrum of really good applications through to not really good applications. I mean, what do we need to do as an industry?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's a really good question. I think as an industry, we do need to give some self-reflection to where we are right now. The BSR have been in place for quite a long time, actually, and actually talking to industry for a long time about what Gateway 2 was going to involve and how it was going to work. Self-reflection would say, I probably sat where people here are sitting, listening to the BSR 2 years ago, kind of talking about this seismic change which is going to happen, the information they required, the kind of step change that the industry needed to make, all those sort of things. I don't think, in self-reflection, I really saw the step change that actually needed to happen. It wasn't a baby step change. This was a monster step change. And actually, that's what we're currently dealing with, is that the industry didn't really get itself set up from the get-go to deal with Gateway 2. And it's going to take the industry to really take some self-reflection. It's not about the applicants. I think we will build into our processes a way of getting through Gateway 2. We will work that out. But everybody in this room also needs to understand that we're all part of the fix here. So it's consultants, in our consultant contracts looking forward, we'll be turning around and saying to structural engineers, MEP engineers, fire engineers, I need a Gateway 2 report from you. Now, I'll take a straw poll in here. Would anyone actually know what that looks like? Now, I think that's one of the things as an industry we need to work out, is how do we present information to the BSR so they can deliver things in 12 weeks, that they can perform to the timescales that they have said. Architects you know, the REBA plan of work doesn't match the gateway process anymore. So actually, you know, some elements I need gateway, I need REBA stage 3. Some elements I need REBA stage 4. Some elements I need REBA stage 5. Does that mean the entire design needs to get to REBA stage 5 before I go through the gateway process? Because that is going to add a huge amount of cost, huge amount of time before we can actually start on site. So I think the kind of, I feel a little bit evangelistic at the moment, that I'm trying to tell everybody, actually, we're all in this together. I have a particular project, a particular reason why I've been lucky enough to speak to the BSR at the highest level, to MHCLG at the highest level, to ministers of state directly. And that's one of our applications. We made the application the middle of February last year, and we're still in Gateway 2. So, and we have a professional design team. We're a pretty good developer. We've done some pretty big stuff, yet we still have not been able to get through. That's 65 weeks. So I think we're kind of a poster child at the moment for this, but also I could come along here and, yes, bash the BSR, but actually I think really what's more constructive is for us to self-reflect as an industry and say, okay, what are we going to change? How do we make that step change?
I mean, it's a very good point you raise, actually, about the REBA plan of work and how essentially that doesn't necessarily align to the gateway process. You know, that's something we need to change our expectations on, certainly. So, I mean, you know, if I could bring in Dan there, you know, design for structures are doing various pieces of design work right the right way through to stage 5. You know, there's some interesting points there about not watering down procurement processes and necessarily pinning your colours to the mast on which systems you want to use, which products you might want to buy. How does that look for design for structures at the moment?
Yeah, again, a really big opportunity. I mean, some of the points that you made, I think as a civil and structural engineer, if you look at the REBA plan of works and you look at REBA stage 4 and 5 in detail, it's clear that structural engineers in the main haven't been producing what they should produce at REBA stage 4 or 5 for a long time. So our background originally as a business was working with manufacturers at REBA stage 4 and 5. And it's those contractor design elements, it's the stuff that just gets left for somebody else to sort out, where we see so much time and so much money on projects. So for us, the Building Safety Act was a great opportunity. I think that because for us, we can design and detail the steel, the concrete, the timber, the light gauge steel, and we can do all of that coordination, and that's really what we've been preaching for the last 8 or 9 years. And if I'm honest, in the traditional construction sector, there's almost been a sort of blasé attitude of, well, we don't really get involved with that, and you know, if we send that incomplete stage 3 or poorly coordinated stage 4 down the supply chain, if they make it and it works, we pay them, and if they make it and it doesn't work, we screw them. And that, unfortunately, culturally is kind of where we've ended up. So what we're experiencing, particularly, we've got 5 Gateway 2 submissions at the moment, and I think one of the things that jumps out is, similar to when BIM got launched in 2010, 2011, no one's ready for it. No one's actually saying what's required. And I think the biggest thing is every principal designer that we're working for is doing it slightly differently. So, you know, you're going to end up with different approaches, different quality of application and things like that. So, and I think that the last sort of practical thing that we're seeing is principal designers are having to engage with supply chain partners earlier because they don't know the products or systems as well as the manufacturing supply chain, for example. And what we're starting to see is companies hiking their prices, hiking the fees for doing the design development and coordination. And I think there's some real practical challenges. If you take steelwork as one example, steelwork designers that work for manufacturing businesses are filling the factory next week. Now, if they're engaged on a project that's not going to be in the factory for a year, what fills the factory next week? So there's some real barriers and real challenges, I think. And I think getting a more standardised and aligned approach, but at the moment it's clear that the building safety regulator don't actually know what they want. And so for us as an industry, we're having to learn on the job and you know, get experience as we go along.
Fantastic, and if I could bring in Neil here. particularly when we're talking about the design development through pre-construction phase. In your experience as Cast, one of the major pieces of work that you do is advising clients on cost planning. Is the advanced design really starting to influence that process? Is that becoming difficult for clients? Are there some strategies emerging for making sure that you can still run a proper commercial tendering process?
Well, firstly, what I'd say, I relate to everything that's been said here. And one of the things we've been doing, which is addressing the procurement thing, is changing how we go through the design stages. So rather than looking at a stage 3, a stage 4 big project, you add 7 months to 7 months, you get 14 months, it's a long time, it doesn't work. We've been focusing on the Gateway 2, and we've actually sort of my war story of 60-week applications still going. We actually did that without a main contractor on a large scheme down in the southeast, and effectively we brought the supply chain around it to provide the information and created a suite because we wanted to get in and see what was happening, and we then bought it out whilst we were in, thinking we had time in a traditional fashion. We're still waiting now, so we had a contractor, but it's been mothballed because we're still waiting on the application. But we've effectively been evolving our processes throughout. And the procurement process, I mean, I'm an advocate. Some of the best projects I've done have paused, completed the design, and then started on site. So there's a lot of merit in getting the design complete and evolved. So what we're doing now is the Gateway 2 deliverables, and I think we could do with more clarity from the regulator as to an agreed set of deliverables, which is problematic, but we're effectively driving that, I think, as industry and being proactive on it. And if we could and then you effectively complete that design to become your employer's requirements or your contract documents. So we're tending to, because the investment tends to still wants a lump sum and a design and build contract, we're tending to do effectively an early engagement with the contractor, and we're then working side by side to develop the design and then effectively negotiating or establishing the final price as you go into the Gateway 2, and then that should be the thing. So we've had to tweak it, and that brings with it certain commercial challenges. You have to know what's in your design. You have to really, have good commercial rigor and diligence, and open book discussions around the quantities, the rates, the procurement, and effectively a paint by numbers through to a negotiated contract sum.
I mean, that's a very, very good point. Is there kind of have over a period of time with the industry operating design and build contracts, is there a loss of kind of knowledge and experience and rigor around that? We've essentially become very used to, taking a stage 3 drawing and put specialist design by a subcontractor, getting the risk away from us. That's the reality of what we're doing, have been doing. Do we need to reset our mindset, and do those skills still exist?
Well, they do. They do exist. I just think that they've been dumbed down over time. So when I started 25 years ago, it was very much you live and die by the sword, traditional contracting. You do the design and you understand what's in it, and then you see more and more, to be confirmed or developed in due course, and that has definitely watered it down, and we've got to get back to that. But no, the skills are still out there. You just have to find the right people and then brief in the right way. I think the other thing is, we do need to get better feedback from the regulator, because we've got a number of applications in as well, and the consistency of the feedback is not good, quite frankly.
All right, so moving on then to some of the other contractual elements. I mean, Peter, your Weston Homes is doing a significant amount of work with BTR providers, social housing providers. How is the approach being taken towards that contractual risk? Are they able to secure funding and draw down until they get through Gateway 2? Are funders nervous of that? When we get to talk about time delays, when we get to completions, how are people cutting the cake on responsibility for that? Who's holding the baby? If you could give us some insight on that, it'd be great.
Well, I just think that's evolved. I think when we were all out there trying to secure whether it's BTR sales, etc., or dealing with RPs to dispose of your affordable element at the early stages, we didn't really know much about Gateway and what the implications would be. So I think we probably had rose-tinted spectacles on, and we're moving forward. I think we always knew that we would eventually, it would come out, we'd end up being in the eye of the storm and we'd have to deal with it. I think the challenge has been, as we've moved more into the eye of the storm, there's been the risk, people are less happy to take on the risk, be it the client or the contractor. So you've got the client there, and you could be talking about institutional investor, got a big fund, needs to deploy that capital, and they need to deploy it. And effectively, if they've got stuff that's stuck in gateways or going to go into a gateway, they're thinking to themselves, I don't really want to be in that market anymore. I need to deploy this, I need to get a return, so maybe I'll just go into housing, right? So I think you've seen a large sort of trend of the institutions moving towards single-family housing. Those that have stuck around because of that, in sort of entrenched and spent a lot of money in consultants and legal fees to get that far, you're then in a bit of a battle with who's going to take the risk. And this is more around Gateway 3. So we talked a lot about Gateway 2 at the moment, but Gateway 3 upon delivery, who is going to take the risk on when that project is going to be delivered? Because you're going to have main contractors or developers like us sitting there saying, look, we can do all we can. We can say that we'll take the risk around the submission or effectively the start date, but we cannot tell you, we can tell you when we can complete that project, but we cannot tell you when that's going to be handed over. So the experiences that I've had in trying to negotiate that with institutions has been really tough, because ultimately we'll both have legal advisors, and both will be advising the parties that, you cannot take the risk and you cannot take the risk. We've been pretty lucky at Weston that those that we've dealt with, we've got an aligned value, an aligned vision, that we've tried to sort of carve a route through there, but and that's enabled us to continue. But you hear more and more every week from trade journals. You're hearing about this, and you're hearing about people exiting the market in our high-rise market, which obviously that we're working in. So mixed experiences. I can see it being it's going to be very tough. I think if you're in a joint venture and if you get into that mindset and you're in a collaborative, shared risk, shared reward, then great. If it's a pure client-contractor relationship, I don't really know how we're going to navigate that at the moment. So yeah, sure.
Yeah, something we've been seeing there on that relationship is effectively a trend towards the sharing of the risk, where it's effectively a relevant event and time is not punitive, but it's not a relevant matter, so there aren't costs, which seems fair, but in reality, if you've then sat there waiting for the project at the end, it's not good. And then the other one is in the student accommodation, because it's such a finite end date, you're just having to bake in time because people are so nervous around the Gateway 3. And I think, I've started campaigning on social media about Gateway 3 already, because I just think we've got to get it automated in some fashion. AI, Gateway 2 has been such a catastrophe that we've got to change what Gateway 3 looks like.
Yeah, very good, very good. So if we were going to be asking central government for something, because there's an ambition to produce 1.5 million homes in this parliament, that's becoming a very increasingly bigger ask. We had some conversation about, is this objectively improving building safety? Is there anything that we would ask the government from that perspective?
So just a couple of bits. I'm not going to dwell too much on what was previously said, because I agree with everything. Yeah. I think the thing that I think we're recognising is that Gateway 2 is now the new planning. So where projects have created a milestone of getting planning, that is no longer the milestone. The milestone now is Gateway 2. So as has already been said, funders want to know, equity particularly, debt as well, they want to know you've got Gateway 2. You might get a term sheet with them, but that's all you're getting. You're not getting a facility ready to go. Yep. I've had conversations with the GLA about grant. The first question was, have you got Gateway 2? And these barriers, it is a barrier to delivery now, the Gateway process, because it is so unknown when you're going to be able to start on site. And I think the kind of the ask, so to speak, I think there's a few bits that I kind of feel. I don't think that the BSR has got the ability to give approval with requirements. They have that ability. They don't use it though. And I think the reason why they don't use it is because they're not set up to actually check off the requirements once they've given the approval. So they do see it as very much a, yes, you can start and then come back to us when you're ready for Gateway 3. So because of the lack of resourcing, that makes sense. I think we're looking at Gateway 2 and kind of actually saying, you know, to the BSR, a little bit of context or moderation related to some of the comments that come out. I've got two quite extreme examples where we've had comments that says, well, you haven't defined the skirting colour in the entrance. And we can't start piling until we have defined the skirting colour. It's a thing, I get it. You know, it is part of the building regulations. You know, you need to have a contrasting colour for the skirting versus the floor finish. I understand it, but I can't start piling. So this, you know, and then the other, quite extreme example was providing details of the evacuation lift. Where's the signage going for the evacuation lift? We will work those things out, you know, and this isn't us designing on the hoof. This is actually, these are, you know, architects are not used to actually defining that detail to that infinite detail at that particular time. So yes, it's about resourcing without question. I think there is also an element here of I don't want to say mindset, because it's the wrong way. I'm almost kind of putting something on the BSR. We need to get used to the fact that the BSR have the view that regardless of how much you've done, we've all done big stuff, it's a fail until you can prove to us that you are fully compliant. And fully compliant means fully compliant. And that's a step change. That's just a huge step change for us. I think more resourcing, more definition around time pre-apps has already been said. That'd be really, really great. Again, that's not in the legislation. So that is one of the things that needs to be changed, tweaked within the legislation. Yep. But I think sort of more use of the approval with requirements would go an awful long way.
Yeah. So make the process less binary, a little bit more like the planning system, essentially with some
Colosseum of Rome.
Yeah.
Is what we're dealing with at the moment. So, are you going to pass? Not sure.
Yeah.
I think what I'd add to that is, having listened to the keynote speech yesterday morning, I fear that there's not a level of awareness at the top leadership as to how much of a problem this is providing our industry. And there was a talk about investment of, I think it was in 60,000 future apprentices and stuff like that. But you know, we are potentially at risk of decimating our workforce and our design force, because we can't all just sit around doing nothing. So it's got to reach the top table more seriously very quickly.
I mean, this is obviously a significant problem for, more so even for SME businesses. You know, if they've secured a piece of land and tied up cash in that, to now have that additional amount of time, you know, there are lots of organisations that won't survive this. You know, and that's the harsh reality, isn't it? That we need to create some awareness around. But I mean, looking forwards, you know, with a bit more positivity. And obviously we are in an off-site constructed house. You know, we can't get through this without a shameless plug. Is there opportunity for modern methods of construction and more components brought in to speed up the process and help recover some viability as we go through Gateway 2 and Gateway 3?
I think that's a really good question, Shaun, and obviously I'm not going to have a shameless plug here as well. But yeah, I mean, look, MMC isn't really going to help at the moment. You know, those projects that are in the gateway system, it's too late. You know, the design is frozen, and to implement it, you've got to go through a change process. So it could be another 60 weeks, Steve. But I mean, the long-term strategy, it has to. I mean, MMC offsite construction aligns with what the BSR is trying to achieve. It's predictable, it's dependable. You know, you've got factory-controlled conditions. You've got standard details. you've got much more information in terms of audit trail, be it during the production in the factory and on site. So all of these things really lead to that. And I think as an industry, again, we all like talking about embracing MMC, but we always enter it too late. So ultimately, it's very difficult then to implement it. The BSR is going to make us think differently. So if you talk about the fact that we need to plan more up front, and that time is going to, erode into your program, you need to look at other methods that are going to, make you those gains back in the delivery phase. So I think from off-site production, we'll have a key part in delivery. And I think it's going to be part of the future submissions. It's not going to fix it now, but if we do embrace MMC, then ultimately it's going to give a lot more confidence to that multidisciplinary team.
I mean, actually, if I could, Dan, bring you in there. Design for Structures has a strong off-site construction kind of background. Are you seeing clients approach you kind of with a different mindset, saying, look, we've got to deliver this tall building. Can you recommend different systems? Is there that step change?
Yeah, I think it's happened. I mean, fortunately we're sort of agnostic as an engineer, so we're not really focused on whether it's steel, it's timber, it's light gauge steel, it's traditional, it's MMC, it's volumetric. What we're really driven by is what's the best solution for the client, what's the best solution for the site in question. I think that the challenge, I think with MMC, if you look at that whole industrialised or standardised approach, that ticks a lot of boxes for Gateway 2, because ultimately once you've provided that Gateway 2 submission with an acceptable level of detail, because your system or your product isn't really going to change other than a bit of evolution, you're rinsing and repeating the same thing. So in some respects it's a good thing, but I think it massively accentuates the problem for MMC businesses. If you look at the failures within the industry over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of the challenges that those companies have is lack of pipeline, lack of visibility. For you guys as a business, you've spent millions of pounds putting together a state-of-the-art factory and a solution. You now need to fill that factory. And I think, unfortunately, our government at the moment have just put the biggest brakes on any kind of progression. Like 1.5 million homes in 5 years is absolute pony. We're not going to get anywhere near it because they've put the shackles on in a really big way. And I think someone mentioned earlier, aspirationally, we know it's the right thing to do. And I do feel that if we get this nailed at some point in the future, there will come a time on the project where we will start to build and construct faster because a lot of the design has been done. But I think aspirationally, we're just trying to run before we can walk on such a monumental level. And without getting too political, if you look at our government and you compare it to Mr. Trump overseas, if Donald Trump was sat here today and we were telling him all of the challenges that Gateway 2 is presenting to us commercially as a business, he'd say, we're not doing it. Forget that. Let's just go back to and the reality is, nobody wants another Grenfell, right? But for the last 60, 70 years, we've been constructing. And if you look at, there's got to be an element of common sense applied to all this. Ultimately, the Building Safety Act is only asking consultants to do what they should do anyway. That's the irony in all this. But the problem is they're now saying, well, actually, we want this to be perfect before we'll even let you crack on. And we've got so many concerns about the market slowdown in terms of they are going to kill the industry. There is going to be a domino effect back end of this year, start of next year, where there just isn't enough work. All of these developers and contractors that are building HRBs, how are they going to keep the lights on if there's no work to do? So I think that from a government perspective, I just think aspirationally, it's just way too ambitious in terms of what they're trying to achieve. Is it going to be good for the industry in the long term? Yes. But will we have an industry if we don't let the shackles off a little bit?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Please do.
Sorry. I was just going to say, you raised a question that we raised on the pre-call, which essentially is a question I'm raising to policymakers at the moment, which is, have we already, before we brought in the gateway process, had we already made the step change in building safety? The introduction of second staircases, the introduction of a non-sprinklers, non-flammable material on the outside of buildings, is that the step change that actually the industry needed? Is there an incremental increase in building safety that the BSR can demonstrate that we did the kind of big building standard, if you like? Is the regulator going to be able to demonstrate the next incremental huge increase in safety? Or will we actually have very few homes kind of coming forward? We've just done a little study looking at building a ground plus 5 story versus a 5 plus 6 story building. Now, for those in the room, they've got a calculator. One goes through the Gateway 2 process and the other one doesn't. 75 weeks difference in program.
It's crazy.
75 weeks. And actually, when I was talking to some of a local authority partner yesterday, he made a really good point, which was saying, essentially, that's actually taking it outside an election cycle now. That a building that will get consent now drops outside an election cycle. So that 6, 8 additional units, 75 weeks different. And you just know that that is going to affect the way people look to design buildings, for developers looking at buildings, whether we're going to actually do those extra units that really the industry needs, that the country needs those extra units to be delivered.
Shaun, we're going back to your question on the use of MMC to address the gateway process. I'm quite a simple person. I like common sense. We tried that at the start of the Building Safety Act. We're still trying it now. My logic is it's got to help. So we've got a 50-odd story tower that we're looking at the moment. One of the contractors we're working with on it has a much higher degree of MMC within the delivery approach. They've also got schemes going through the gateway process, which will be determined by the time we get to our applications, etc. Decision makers are definitely factoring that in. I am thinking about it in our recommendations to clients, and there has to be more certainty in the same way as there's on-site health and safety benefits, speed of construction, carbon, etc. It has to be factored in.
Actually, I'll take a little bit of chair's privilege here. I would really like personally to ask the regulator to consider an accreditation scheme. We have this with building warranty providers. The NHBC, for instance, have the NHBC Accepts program because they know that they're going to look at the same construction details again and again and again and again. And by putting their stamp to say, yes, I trust you, I've audited you, been through the rigour up front, their major projects team will get through that process much, much faster. And I think there's an opportunity there for the regulator. But I would ask, do we think that objectively we are improving building safety? I mean, we have actually had some fires over the last year, and although the press doesn't necessarily pick up on them because they've not been disasters, actually the buildings have performed as they're supposed to. Is there any experience around that, and what would we be asking for in terms of, are we objectively increasing building safety, and how would we kind of create a bit of a mindset there saying, do we need to make this any more onerous, or actually can we back things off a little bit?
We're seeing, there are vast improvements and in terms of pockets of excellence, I suppose we call it. There are, over the last 15 years, again, if we just use the example of BIM again, because I think it's very similar in terms of the challenges that it's presenting. We're 15 years on from when the government mandated BIM, and we're still receiving IFC files with caveats. Collaboration, I think you mentioned earlier. Again, we don't collaborate in this industry. Everybody's doing the bare minimum that's required and trying to protect their own contractual position. But I think in pockets, if you can find groups, and we work very successfully with a number of architects now, where we move from one project to the next, we try and keep the same project teams together, and we try and work with the same clients. And I think we've seen, huge change over the last probably 5 to 10 years in terms of working with the same people on the same projects and working more in partnership. And I think we have a training academy that we used to base out at Dudley College, and their Advanced 2 building was built probably about 10, 15 years ago, but with an integrated project insurance model. And again, seeing small snippets of things like that happen where there's a project insurance policy rather than everybody insuring the same thing individually, and a shared commercial arrangement where, if the budget is delivered inside, everybody shares the spoils. If we go over budget, everybody shares the pain. And I think that seeing that it knocked down some barriers around, okay, we've got a problem, and it isn't who's going to pay for the problem, it's how do we solve the problem as quickly and as efficiently as possible so that we end up with a great result. So I think that the industry massively has moved forward. And unfortunately, it's like, again, we're almost acting like, we've got disasters left, right and centre here, and we haven't. We've got a very isolated number of incidents, but we're now going, okay, we've got to be belt and braces with everything. And I think the other last point that I want to make is, like, the first question we get asked as a structural engineer is, how much PI do you carry, and are you willing to sign a collateral warranty? Yeah. There is no discussions around what's your capability and are you fit for purpose to deliver this project. So you're talking about that accreditation piece earlier. That really sits with me because ultimately, as I see it, people are engaging with us to insure their project, not to say, okay, we can see all of the excellent design and detailing that you can bring. And again, sad indictment, but I think the industry has progressed massively, but it feels like we're talking like we've got this looming disaster that we're all trying to avoid.
Sure.
I was just going to add on to that. We're focusing on design, but designs have improved. Designs have got better and better, but the key challenge has always been the implementation of that design, and that's why we think we've gone out there and we've designed these fantastic buildings with embedded safety. But the challenge has always been around people putting it together, and so that's where we still need to be focused on that. I think going back to the point around off-site construction, you're getting that dependability, that quality and that audit trail. So I think, look, let's get past Gateway 2 and we're saying, look, the designs are going to be so much better, but we've still got to take it from Gateway 2 to Gateway 3 and ensure we're removing all those risk elements out there. So, buildings have been built better, but still work to be done there.
Indeed.
One other thing sort of upstream as well that we've seen is that the decision-making process at clients and investors has definitely shifted the dial much more towards erring on the side of caution and not over-designing but building these things in. And I think people are looking much more now towards the investability exit of these portfolios of projects. And if you're not if you haven't got the right things in place, or it's just not an investable product. So I think there's a cultural shift as well.
Definitely. Well, look, we all need to be able to raise capital and invest in projects, right? So, I mean, look, we're starting to run a little short on time. We want to make sure we've got some opportunity for some questions. But just before we finish up, nice positive look forwards. We'll just go across and we'll all ask the regulator for one thing, or perhaps from central government. What would we be asking for at the moment?
Well, I think we need to address the current issue around Gateway 2, which for me is more resources and better leadership around the Gateway 2 process.
Fantastic.
I think it's just a recognition of the issues that we're dealing with. Yeah. I think central government, we're still trying to tell central government actually how difficult the situation is. And Daniel raised the point really well. The amount of skilled labour which is leaving the industry is shocking at the moment, and the capacity in the industry is going to shrink like you would not believe, and it doesn't just come back overnight. No. When the floodgates open, when Gateway 2 is successful, who's going to build it? Who's going to be around to take it on? So I think it's recognition from central government.
Excellent.
I think there has to be an absolute pre-application process. Yep. That needs to be implemented. It will speed things up, and then check-ins along the way, you know, whether they post-application check-ins.
Excellent. Dan?
I suppose more common sense and less bureaucracy, you know, try and speed this up. That's the only way I can put it, because if we don't, we've got a major problem coming.
Yeah, yeah. Very good. Okay, so we've got resourcing, acknowledgement, transparency and planning, and then the really tough ask, a bit of common sense. Excellent, brilliant. Well, look, if there's any questions for our excellent panel out in the audience, you know, please pop your hand up, and we'll put it to the guys. Yeah, very good. Excellent. Well, look, we covered off the topic so well. No need for questions. So, look, thank you very, very much, guys. I think we've still got an exciting afternoon in front of us at UK Roof. We've got some more events back here this afternoon. But thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully to our audience, you know, it's been informative and productive. All right, thank you.